Okay. All right, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Tanya, chapter 13. So let's do a little review of chapter 12. Carol has some questions. Let me just review 12, and then you have questions on 12 or 13?
They're from the past.
Okay, just a quick brief review, and then you can ask your questions. The review is essentially, in 12 it says, now that we, in the previous chapters, said we have an animal soul, godly soul, they each vie to win the expression in the body. That's the battle. And we said that the Beinoni is not like the Tzaddik where he vanquished the Yetzer Hara, the unique few individuals in a generation, in a millennia, who are unique spiritual powerhouses where they actually can vanquish the evil inclination or the animal soul and convert it to good. The Beinoni does not do that. The Beinoni has perfect behavioral control and never gives in expression to the animal soul's will to express itself in selfish or sinful thought, speech, or action, or willful thought, speech, or action. And the Beinoni can do this, we said in chapter 12, because of a certain psychological rule of the human being of Moyach Shalat al Halev, which Moyach Shalat al Halev means that the heart is subdued, or the mind has supremacy over the heart has supremacy, the mind has supremacy over the heart. And even when you really want to do something, the mind, what you know is right, what you want to do, you can overcome what the heart wants by the knowledge of what is you're supposed to do. And that is how the Beinoni is someone who is a perfect behavioral individual, in spite that there is a urge inside to, of course, act like normal, selfish human being urges. He just doesn't give in to them because of that rule of Moyach Shalat Alev, the mind has final say on the heart. That's where we left off chapter 12. Carol has some questions.
Okay. Well, so as I was reviewing things, I was wondering where the idea of the left and right ventricles of the heart originally come from.
So I'm not, it's a good question. Is this biology as we understand it today? I'm not a great I'm not a great science major here. But what I understand is that the way science back then described the heart was, or in the Kabbalistic time, the way the heart was described was that the left side has the blood, the right side doesn't have the blood. I don't know which one's pumping, which one's coming. It's not so relevant, the exact physiological elements. It represents the idea behind there's a right side, there's a left side, conceptually in the heart. The heart is not just pure, you give me, there's given, there's a take, and the heart's complex, at least the emotions, the passion of the heart. The left side, in general, left typically in Judaism represents the more, I don't want to call evil side, but the more negative prone side. At least, because by majority of people, the left hand is the weaker hand. That's so my left and right it's an idea that's brought down in Kabbalah. Perhaps it reflected even the science of the time of the way they understood the heart. But again, even if it's not what I looked into a little bit. I don't know the way the heart operates, to be honest. I know the heart pumps blood and it oxygenizes the blood. So I'm not sure exactly, but the main point is that your passion is an emotional passion. A lot of it is selfish because that's the main tool of the animal soul. But within there is a small room, a small space that is passion for holy things or divine things, selfless things. That's the main takeaway from that.
So it sounds like it's mostly like symbolic rather than.
Yes, it is. It's absolutely symbolic because, again, the soul is not a physical force. It's a spiritual force that can cause a physical. I don't know if that's true. It's a spiritual energy that one part of it, the lowest level of it, energizes the body. But what happens when it doesn't energize the body? Is the soul now kaput? No, the soul, even while it's in the body, there's layers of the soul that are transcendent to the body. It's a spiritual frequency, it's a different level. The fact that it can give life into a body is because the soul is actually was learning this morning in another Hasidic discourse, and I just learned it for the first time. So I don't want to try to quote it too much, but there's life and then there's the source of life. Life is like the ray of the sun, and the source of life is like the sun. Meaning, life doesn't just exist without a source. The fact that the soul can actually give life to the body, it's not like that's what it is and that's what it ends. It says, no, it also is a source that gives that life, right? So the fact that it energizes the body, that's great. But that's not like the beginning and the end of the soul. Life-giving ability to the body. There's a source where that comes from, and that actually is the well or the source of the soul, or the soul being a source to that life force of the body. So my point is the soul is not just like a physical, it's not like a battery for the body only. It's a spiritual energy that also is a battery to the body.
Okay.
At least as God dictates the amount of lifespan of that person. When that ends, the soul continues to exist in its state that that existed before life and before birth, and while the body was giving life to the body as well.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes. So it seems like everything that we've read so far, it's all in the male gender. And I was wondering if there's some differences between the female and male gender in all of this.
Great question. Generally speaking, no, there is no difference. As far as a woman could be a Beinoni, just like a man can be. And the woman has an animal soul and a godly soul, just like man does. Why? Classical Hebrew, was written back then. Men were more the ones that were scholarly and the ones that were, scholars. So it was written in that tense. Hebrew in general is masculine, feminine tense in words. So, but it's not to exclude that. That's just the way books back then are written.
Okay.
I mean, there could be, now, I don't know if Tanya talks about it, but we definitely believe spiritually men and women have unique powers because they have unique roles in this world, right? A man can't give birth to a child, therefore it doesn't have the unique psychological, emotional powers that come along with that, life, that physical life-giving ability. And there's a certain nature that a woman doesn't have. So they have these spiritual powers that give them the ability to do that. But that's more like details. The general idea that we're supposed to Torah mitzvahs and to control ourselves, that exists by men and women equally.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Carol, you done? Is there anything else?
Yeah. Thank you.
Rabbi?
Yes, Alan.
Yeah, I have two questions that I wrote down. Which Hebrew word do you use for the soul? And then I was thinking, Carol, is there a difference between a female soul and a male soul, or are both souls identical before incarnation?
So question one was, which Hebrew word do you use for the soul?
Yeah.
So I think we spoke about this a couple times, but there are 5 names of the soul.
Is it one soul or just 5 different levels at which the
5
soul
levels,
exists?
5 levels of the one soul.
And the one soul can be, depending on what level it is, it could be a nefesh or a chaya or a neshama, right?
Right. I mean, I think it's like, who are you?
Ruach.
Just like a human being, your personality is multifaceted.
So let's just talk about the nefesh then. I mean,
So when we're talking about the life animating soul, the one that interacts with the body, we call that nefesh. When we're talking about the emotional realm, capability of the person, that's called ruach. If we're talking about the intellectual ability, we're talking about the neshama. Give me a second, because I know that in the godly soul, all those layers exist. In the animal soul, actually, it would have to exist to have free will. You'd have to have, tit for tat. Like if there's a level of soul that gives, of the divine soul that interacts with the body, that would have to exist. We say that's the physical life force. The fact that the body's alive, is that from the animal soul or the godly soul?
I think it's just one soul personally.
Right. Right. I mean, I understand that the challenge we have with that is that because the Torah refers to multiple souls in the person. Chapter 1, we quoted from the prophets, Minashami Sani Asisi, the souls that I've made in the one person.
I didn't hear the last sentence, Rabbi.
I mean, the Tanya's novel, not novel, but its stress is that there are 2 souls or 2 psyches. He quotes it from the prophet that said, "V'neshamis ani asisi," the souls that I made. Referring to in the body, there's souls, plural.
And how about the Torah? What does the Torah say about it?
Why is the Nevi'im not part of the Torah?
The Torah is one Torah, 5 books of Moses. That's what I mean by the Torah.
Right, but I'm saying the Torah won't always talk about elaborate on certain ideas that the prophets elaborate on.
I think the Torah, I think it covers quite a bit of ground, and I think usually I trust the Torah. I don't trust a lot of the other writings because the Jewish people were out of control a lot of the time.
But they didn't write it. Divinely inspired prophets wrote those books, and they were canonized with the men of the men of the Great Assembly as being.
I agree. I hear you. I'm just telling you my personal view. I just need the Torah. The Torah is where I'm grounded. I have I'm almost, I'm not that well versed in a lot of the prophets, even though I've read a lot of it. But the
I'm not
Torah
either.
does.
I'm not either, but it doesn't take away that it exists and it's a canon. It's part of the canon of the Tanakh. Like, meaning just because I
Tanakh is
can't.
different. Tanakh contains the Torah, but the Torah itself is what the Torah tells me, that there's such a thing as a nefesh, and even an animal, like a bull or a cow or a sheep. They have, that animal has a soul called a nefesh.
Right. Agreed.
And then if you look in Genesis, there's something called what? Nishmat Elohim, is that right? Nishmat.
Selim Elokim.
Selim Elohim, but there's also, I think, Nishmat.
Could be. I can't think at the moment. Could
Okay,
be.
I'll have to look that up.
The point is that in general, the Torah is as concise as possible. There's a lot of nuance and context, which is why we need to understand. We believe that the earlier generations, for sure, the prophets, and even the rabbis in the Talmud, they were closer and understood the context and language of the Torah. The way you might read it, I might read it, was okay, nefesh and nefesh, it's all the same. But we know, nuance makes a big deal, placement, context. So I think suffice to say that we can rely on the Alter Rebbe, who was a genius and literally knew the Torah, the 5 books, the Nevi'im, the Kesuvim, the writings, the Talmud, the Kabbalah by heart, interchange, and could cross-reference. So, if it was me, you could have, we could argue. I can't always, prove my line of thinking throughout. But Alter Rebbe and many great scholars at that time, when they're quoting something, it's consistent throughout. So if you're quoting something and it doesn't seem right, you have to have a little bit of trust in the authors that literally had they were so well versed that when they clarify something, it's not just their opinion. There's a certain consistency throughout all of Torah and Talmud and Mishnah and everywhere. Okay.
I have to learn things in terms of things that I already know and understand, and that's why I'm probably giving you a hard time. So I apologize for that.
No, I understand. Look, you have to open your mind, tell you a story. There was there were 2 great in Dvinsk. I think it was in Dvinsk, some town in Belarusia. In the early 1900s, there was 2 great, we're talking genius Torah scholars, world-renowned. One was Rabbi Yosef Rosen, and one was the Or Sameach. He wrote a book called Or Sameach. One was the Hasidic rabbi, one was the Lithuanian rabbi. And they're both giants. They're just in their knowledge and their writings. And their followers had arguments, about who's bigger, who's a bigger scholar. They're both literally like world-renowned geniuses in the Torah. And in Yiddish, they would argue every so my rabbi is Gresser. Gresser is Yiddish for bigger. Bigger scholar. And the others said, no, my rabbi is Gresser. I don't know the exact context. I think it was a little more nuanced than that, but that was what they were arguing. And after hearing this for a while, a 6-year-old boy said, I don't know what you're arguing about. It's clear that the Or Sameach is Gresser. He's bigger. He says, you're 6 years old. How do you know Talmudic, prowess to judge? He says, it's simple. He's 6'1" and he's 5'7". He's bigger. So you have to understand, a lot of times when we know something, it's in a very, first of all, we come with it with our, our secular education as well, our social education, and that's our frame of reference. We have that. The Torah has its own frame of reference, its own language, its own frame of reference, its own even style. you have to realize that we're coming with a little bit of a disadvantage just to our, our lack of breadth, of the whole sea of the Torah and the Talmud, and even style. So that's where it's very important why we try so hard to read the commentaries, because we say these people that were steeped in it, and their understanding is much more native and simply broadly knowledgeable. So we're going to move on now. This is the general rule you can have your opinion, you should have your opinion, you should have questions based on what you know, but we have to understand that our knowledge about things, particularly esoteric things, is very, there's a certain limit based on where we're coming from.
Rabbi Deb G said something that you might want to look at, a question.
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, so Deb G, not all people have a nefesh, but not everyone has a ruach and neshama. Everybody has a ruach and neshama. The question is, do they live with it? Is it part of your day-to-day life? I think that's the main question. I'm saying that we all have it. The question is revealed. This is actually relevant to what we're going to talk about soon. So chapter 13 continues more about the Beinoni, the complex life of the Beinoni. If you remember in chapter 1, we spoke about what's a Beinoni. We said it doesn't seem to make sense. Half, the average guy. It said in the Talmud, the tzaddik, Yetzer Tov Sheftan, his Yetzer Tov, his godly soul, sort of interchangeable, is the one who judges him. The Rasha, Yetzer Hara Sheftan, his Yetzer Hara judges him. The Beinonim Zev is Sheftan. They both judge him. Both the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. And we say, what does it mean? How could it be half? We saw that it doesn't make sense in the Talmud and other places to call Beinoni a guy who sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, because it doesn't make sense based on different things we said there. So we said, last week we said, no, the Beinoni is only, he only listens to his Yetzer Tov, his godly soul, the good inclination. So why does the Talmud, which the Talmud is not going to contradict the Tanya will never go against an earlier source, which the Talmud is. The Tanya says the Beinoni never listens to the bad inclination. He says, no, it fits perfectly. Zev is Zev Sheftan. Both the good inclination, the godly soul, the bad inclination, the animal soul, they both judge him. What's a judge on a panel? A judge on a panel gives an opinion. But they're on a panel, they don't get to make the sole decision. You're on a panel. So when it comes to a situation, and the Beinoni desires to do something selfish, or in worst case, something sinful, that's coming as animal soul. The judgment of the animal soul is, I think you should go do that. I think you should eat that decadent chocolate cake, and just enjoy yourself for the sake of enjoyment. The godly self says, no, is that going to help you're going to have energy? Is it going to make you sluggish, the sugar? Is it going to give you enough, or is it just enough to give you a little bit of, a little pep? Then you can go back to living a productive mitzvah life. Don't eat the whole thing. They're both judging. That actually the Talmud means they're both judging. They're both giving their opinion, because we said the Beinoni has an animal soul that will give that opinion. But who decides? So he says, who decides in the Beinoni? The godly soul. But here we actually add another element to it. We say that were it not for God helping the Beinoni, let me just actually get the plug real quick. Hold on a minute. The Beinoni, what was it saying? The Beinoni has another power that helps him pick the right thing. And that we say is the third judge. Who's the third judge? Is God. Is a halacha, in general in Judaism, You always fall off to the majority, right? In a ruling. So you have 3 judges, you always have an odd number of judges because you want to get to a majority ruling. So the animal soul says, eat the chocolate cake. Eat it, enjoy yourself, don't think twice. The godly says, no, only eat enough to have a little bit of pep, but don't eat it just to be selfish. Eat it to say a bracha, eat it to have energy, but don't go too far, or don't eat it if it's going to make you feel tired and unproductive or whatever. The 3rd judge is God. It says in the Talmud, the law that were not for God assisting the person, you would never be able to overcome the Yetzer Hara, aka the animal soul. And what is that assistance that God gives? It's a glimmer of God's light shining. It's a glimmer of God's light shining on the divine soul. Very interesting note it said here. What do you mean, a glimmer of God's light shining on the divine soul? Isn't the divine soul a spark of God? So how does that, like, what do you mean it needs God, it needs God to like shine it to pick, a third judge to help you do the right thing. So it says an interesting point in the practical Tanya that although the divine soul is a spark of God, it does interface with the body. So what's different about it versus any other creation is that divine soul can always realize its true identity, that it's only a spark of a greater existence. So the assistance that Tanya speaks of here is that the divine soul has the ability to get in touch with its true self, easier than any other creation where that connection to the source is more hidden. I want to point out a cool thing that I noticed. We spoke before, how does the Beinoni always choose the perfect behavioral choice if he wants to? There's a will, there's a way, even though he always might desire sometimes to do something selfish. So we said is that we said the mind has this supremacy over the heart. What do you need a third party? You told me before, the mind, if you know it's right, you can force it on the heart. So the notes here say there's different levels of a Beinoni's day. Sometimes are more inspired to do the right thing, and sometimes you really need God's help in order to pick the right choice. So we spoke that a Beinoni, in the middle of his prayers, when he prays and he's thinking of his prayers, and he has he's praying before to he's meditating on God before, so when he's praying, he's really thinking of who he's praying to, and he's really realizing the relationship. His animal soul can be neutralized then. After the animal soul is neutralized in the middle of prayer, then you can you have a glimmer, like a little residue of that experience that helps you throughout the day, that the mind, which remembers that it wanted in the middle of prayer, wanted and realized that really life's about doing your mission from God and connecting to God and living a Godful life. Even when you're in prayer, there's more fire, there's more passion for that. But even after the prayer, you're going to your job, you remember that, you remember how excited you were, it helps you have mind supremacy over the heart's selfish pull. So that's where the mind over the heart works. What about the rest of the day? Let's say you're uninspired. Let's say you didn't have a good davening that day. Then you need this other tool of the Beinoni, which is even when you're not super inspired from your morning prayers, you don't even have the residual effect, still you can choose the right thing, because even your heart, your animal soul says, do selfish. The godly soul wants to do selfless, holy. God helps tilt the scale towards the divine. Howard had a question.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So, we've been talking a lot about the animal soul and the divine soul and how they're, we've talked about how they're in battle with each other. And I'm curious, is there ever, what about the notion of them in balance with each other? Is that ever a goal, or is it the idea that there is never an internal peace if the two souls are balanced, that we always want to go a little more towards the divine soul?
A great question. The answer is, I'll tell you, there's a short answer, but just give an example. When you're a child, you're probably more individualistically selfish, right? I have my needs and that's the whole world, right? Agreed, Howard?
Yeah, okay.
Child is more individualistically selfish, self-oriented. Very simple. I want ice cream. I don't care if you don't have ice cream. I want your ice cream, I want all the cake. I don't care if there's not enough for you. When you get older, you realize that it's not in your best interest to have that attitude, right? It's actually, you're going to turn off people. You're not going to be able to work with people. You're actually not going to get anything you want if you have that attitude. Correct?
Okay.
So you'll work more with people, but ultimately, a person could work more with people because really they know that's how you do business. That's how you do things. You want to make it, be any type of success or whatnot, you got to work with people. You can't just grab all the cake. You have to not take all the cake. And then people will continue to have a team and work with you, or, that type of thing. That's still animal soul. It's just a smarter animal soul. It's a more mature animal soul. It's still selfish. It's still, I want to make sure I'm taken care of, and that's the way it's done. So before I answer your question, I just want to point out that we see, even within the animal soul, we evolve. We evolve from like crass selfishness to more sophisticated self-interest. Now, of course, we can't just say, well, you'll just naturally always progress till you'll be a Beinoni. That doesn't happen without a choice. A lot of hard work. But of course, like you're saying, we're going to talk actually more about this in a few chapters. The goal is not to be on every single thing in life a battle. Like when you're 35 years old and you see ice cream, it shouldn't be a battle. I want to steal that person's ice cream, or anything else that's sort of more kid-like or even teenage-like, right? The goal is not that you should always fight in everything. Of course, with knowledge and with work on oneself, you sublimate parts of yourself for not to be a battle. And you even see some people are more, I don't know, holy, but less, internal struggle than others. So of course we slowly refine different facets of our life. In Judaism, we'll talk, that's actually when we see the whole purpose of why we have animal souls, to refine. We're not going to conquer every part of it and vanquish it, but to for sure refine parts of it, and even to harness its unique energy for higher purpose and values. So to your answer, we're not going to fight with everything. The point here, we're not even up to there yet, is really that realize that in spite of that you're a good guy, you've worked and you have a lot of good things figured out, it doesn't change the fact that you have a very healthy animal soul that wants what it wants, which is self-oriented stuff. It might not steal that kid's ice cream, or it might even want to do a mitzvah. But it doesn't mean that you don't have an animal soul in other areas that need work on. And you'll work on one at a time, and you'll on that never-ending journey of refining parts of your psyche and life.
So let's, if I may, just give a quick hypothetical. Let's say you have the inclination to do something that that moves towards the divine. So it's the inclination of your divine soul, or that God's putting the thought in your, and that whatever inclination, wherever direction that inclination sends you, actually puts your own survival in question. So in that case, your animal soul would have to say, you know, in any other situation, I have to look out for number one, but I can't do it right now because this particular thing, whatever it is more important. So that seems like something that would be acceptable for the animal soul to give up, but then they're not in balance, right? So it seems like however the chips fall, the animal soul's always going to, what's the word? You know, give up to defer, excuse me. The animal soul is always going to defer to the divine soul.
Why do you say always will defer to the divine soul?
Well, because the only reason why, well, I guess then the question would be, does a divine inclination, is it worthy and worth following if it puts your survival, which is the domain of your animal soul, your self, if that puts that in jeopardy?
So the Torah, which is the rule book of the divine soul, right? The mitzvahs and the laws is the God's will, which is the way the divine soul is able to do what it wants. That playbook. There's the majority of Torah say v'chai behem. You're not allowed to give your life. You're not allowed to, if it's talking about life and death survival, you're not allowed to put in jeopardy. For most scenarios. And three, extreme scenarios of adultery, murder, and idolatry, one is called upon to give their life. And many times you find, interestingly, that, particularly with idolatry or forced conversion to another religion, Jews did give their life, even if they were totally ignorant of Torah. So we find there's a special adrenaline because it's so extreme and it's so clear you're cutting yourself off from God, even temporarily. It's too stark. The divine soul will override the animal soul. I think many people would not be able to kill somebody else, even if it's at their own life's peril, right? I even think we can relate to that. Many people would not. It's just too gross. Maybe some people could, but many people would find it abhorrent, even at the risk of their own life. So I think majority of the time, no, the animal soul has a lot of power and chooses the decision. The divine soul, we just say, we speak of a natural overriding only in those three cases. Or in idolatry, where the soul just feels there's too much detachment, I can't do it. But to do a regular sin, or the divine soul might feel, but it doesn't have that override power without a lot of will and self-control. We say you have to decide to engage in.
And the Yetzer Hara never influences the divine soul, right?
Right. It's not trying to.
So sometimes
wait. The Yetzer Hara, by the way, just to remind you, we said in the end, I think it was chapter 9, that the Yetzer Hara is a servant of God. Remind yourself that, right? The Yetzer Hara is doing its job that God gave it to do. Or the animal soul, Yetzer Hara, animal soul, different names for a similar concept. And the Talmud said that's the example of the prince who was an incredible prince, moral prince, and the king wanted to test his resolve and hired a harlot to test the prince's resolve. And the harlot knew that the goal of this experiment was to see the prince break or overcome. And the harlot wanted the prince to resist her because she knew the king would be happy when if the prince would prove himself. When the prince did, the king was overjoyed, and the harlot was also overjoyed because they're all faithful citizens of the king. So the animal soul being a seducer, it's just doing its job. It's not trying to convince the godly soul. It's trying to get you, your body, or we say the decisor is the intellectual consciousness, to decide to succumb. It doesn't care, but the divine soul doesn't care. It doesn't want to come along. It's not its goal. The divine soul's goal is to actually affect the body's execution, behavior, and to reprogram your animalistic way of thinking slowly to be a more higher purpose, holy will, but not entirely, as much as it can. Like if I tell you, Howard, that when you're 15-year-old, you know what, the best thing I can think of is having billions of dollars, doing whatever I want. You think that's the best thing I can think of, right? You get older, you realize, money's great, but it's definitely not the entire thing a human being needs. You need love, you need relationships, and that if it's going to be $1 billion, I'm 50 years old, I have $1 billion, I don't need anything else, right? And you're like, well, I would like the money also, but I definitely need those other things as well. It's a higher form of thinking. So the godly soul is going to try, we'll learn later about that. Its goal is to also change the paradigm of what's good. What's good? Well, if you go from your teenage self, good is very, materialistic. If you get, from your older self, good is a lot more nuanced, and it's like a fine wine.
So you might have said this before, but is the idea that in the time of Mashiach, nobody has an animal soul anymore?
Yes, it says God's going to take away the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul, yes.
So that everybody would be, so we would all be human beings, but we would be all tzaddiks.
Yeah, I guess. Yes, would be tzaddiks. Yes.
Okay.
Basically like this, God's going to open up your eyes and you're going to see that, the physical reality is actually just a layer of the spiritual wholeness of God, and that's going to be your reality. So you're going to want what you're going to want, just like, you like to taste the sweet fruit, as a physical sensation, you're going to want to have a sweet piece of Torah knowledge and connect to the divine. It'll just be a palpable sweetness for your senses. Your senses will be opened up to greater reality than just, the physical five senses.
But there's still a necessity for the physical.
Yeah, because the physical, we'll get later in time about this,
Okay.
but yes, the physical is very important. There actually is an argument against Maimonides and Nachmanides. In the Messianic age, the ultimate will, basically the bodies will only be a world of souls, or will be a world of souls and bodies. And Maimonides surprisingly says that there will be a period of the resurrection of the dead, where the souls will come back to the bodies. Then ultimately the bodies will not exist, and it'll just be a bunch of souls basking in eternal bliss. Nachmanides says no, the end game is soul in body, and Hasidism follows Nachmanides on that. The ultimate end game is soul in body in a perfect world. And both are realizing the wholeness of God's experience.
Oh, okay, thanks.
All right, we move on a little bit. Yeah, it's pretty scary. A world of no bodies, right? There's going to be bodies. Don't worry. That's the way we rule for the most part. There will be bodies. You asked a couple questions, Alan. Was Moses a Beinoni? Was the Rebbe Beinoni? No, they were tzaddikim. That's the short answer. Who says the Yetzer Hara will leave in the times of Mashiach? It's brought down in the Talmud. It also says, perhaps even the Talmud quoting from Tanakh. Okay, we're going to move on because we have to at least cover some ideas in the next 10 minutes. Okay. Now, this explains the original passage we had a question about. The original passage was, Tanya started off with, we make, before the person's born, we make the soul, before it goes into the body to give it life, we make the soul swear, you're going to be a tzaddik, and you won't be a rasha. Right? Be a tzaddik, don't be a rasha. And the end of that statement was, and even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, don't believe them. Should be in your eyes like a rasha. So based on that Talmudic passage, based on Tanya, we can understand that Talmudic passage. The goal in life is to be a tzaddik in behavior. Ba'alti rasha, don't be a Russian behavior. Tzaddik is defined in behavior, someone whose outsides, their thought, speech, and action, is being dictated by the drive of the divine soul and good things, mitzvahs. Don't be a rasha. Don't be one who is driven, whose behavior is decided by what's a rasha? Someone whose animal soul decides their behavior, whether a lot or a little. Fine, that's what's based in the earlier chapters. That's the goal. And we call this in Tanya Beinani, someone who doesn't give in to their behavior, their desire to be animal soul behavior, but they only act like tzaddik behavior, tzaddik outside behavior. But you might think, hey, I've been acting like a tzaddik. I must be a tzaddik now. My behavior is perfect. Finishes the Talmudic passage. If you look inside look inside page 156, we say to him, even if the whole world sees your outsides and says, you are a tzaddik, don't believe them, because you can't go by your outsides. You should be in your eyes, kirasha, like a rasha. Your insides, you should know that lurks animal soul. This is the nuance that you read a Talmudic passage. We answer a lot of questions there because this explains the goal, the ultimate goal for the average person. You don't have to change your insides to be perfect. That is not a goal for 99.999% of people. That's for the few tzaddikim in a generation, and their goal, their purpose in life is either good or better. To be an example of a divine role model, but it's not good versus bad. The majority of us have an animal, so we have bad. So try to act like a tzaddik, but know that inside you're kirasha, you're like a rasha. You're not a rasha, because the baby doesn't do anything bad. The guy made the decision to never act behavior like a rasha. But he's inside his kirasha. Okay. They want to point out, and then Tanya points out that there's times that the day that's easier for a baby. When you study Torah, it's easier. First, let's say someone who studies Torah in a sincere way the whole day. You know, they're independently wealthy and they study Torah the whole day. So it's not an issue. And they're studying Torah and they're so involved in it and it's so enjoyable, they're not having a chance to sin. Or let's say, people go to Israel, right? They go to yeshiva in Israel, they get very excited. It's a very holy place. This is the air of Israel, raises you up. Then you make resolves. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to America. I'm gonna, do X, Y, and Z mitzvah. And then it's harder, and life gets in the way. That's a proof that they're normal. They're not a Beinani, because a Beinani would make the resolve that even when it's hard, would have the control of themselves. Even when it's hard, they would either, they would not give in to that behavioral desire of the animal soul. So the point is, even in times you think, my prayer, Yom Kippur, High Holidays was so great. I must be a tzaddik. your special powers on Yom Kippur that you prayed and acted better. Don't think that you become a tzaddik and you're going to have that ease the next day. Realize that that was a gift you have to harness when you have temptation to choose selfish animal soul stuff. You will overcome it, whether with the boost of your morning prayers, whether with God giving you the power to overcome, all that. No, the main thing, the point of this is that you should know you have an animal soul. And this is very interesting. That question in the first chapter. Well, I'm not going to get into this. It's not so relevant now. We talk about two types of truth at the end of the chapter 13. In general, in Torah, truth is defined as consistency. The word for truth is emet, aleph, mem, taf. If you might have heard that aleph is the first letter, taf is the last letter, mem is the middle letter. Because Torah, emes, spelled up of the first, middle, and last letter, it has to be consistent throughout. You have something that's true 90% of the time, but it's not true another time, that's not real truth. That's relative truth. That's functional truth. It's not real truth. Truth is absolute. I have about 1 minute left, so I know we're going to get a lot of questions about truth and whatnot. We're going to have to save for next week. So the Beinoni, you might say, what is the Beinoni? When he has divine inspiration, he gets excited in the middle of prayer for God, and it dissipates after, that must be fake. That must be imaginary, because real truth is like a tzaddik. A tzaddik loves God and always stays with that love and stays with that emotion. But a Beinoni has it sometimes by Torah learning, by prayer, booster times. But the rest of the day, he doesn't have that devotion and that love, that natural choosing the right thing. It must be that even when he has it, it must be imaginary, you might think, based on the definition that truth is absolute. So we say no. When a Beinoni, when any of us has a feeling of love, of prayer, it's not fake. But wait, it doesn't last. It must be false. The answer is that really the divine soul always has a love for God. But because we're put in this challenge to refine the body and the psyche, the animal soul, that gets in the way. And that's part of life, is overcoming that. But when you have moments of truth, of connecting to God and mitzvahs, it's not fake. It's not hypocritical. The next day you don't. It's real because the barrier is put in your way by the animal soul. But a real a feeling for a mitzvah, do the right thing, is a real feeling. So it's called the svasem, it's the lip of truth. Relative to a tzaddik's truth, that he's just feeling the love and always wants the right thing, that's obvious. That's his truth. The fact that we falter back and forth, we want to do good sometimes, middle prayer or whatnot, then we go back to not. That's because of the animal soul getting in the way. It doesn't change that your divine soul, which is your real identity, the real essence of who you are, does want to do the right thing. And when it does, don't look at yourself as a hypocrite. All right, that ends chapter 13. I think the walk away, the take home of today is that there will be times of prayer and Torah study, very powerful times. It says a Beinoni feels like a tzaddik then, could feel like a tzaddik. And even if you're not a Beinoni, it gives you an idea that it's a special time to feel more than usual. So don't take prayer and Torah study lightly. At the same time, know that a lot of the time you're kirasha, inside, the evil is lurking. You might have feel like, oh yeah, I had a great streak, I did this. Don't give up, don't let up. You got to be vigilant if you want to achieve behavioral control and making the right choices on the outside, which is our goal. Be a tzaddik in your outsides, in your thoughts, speech, and action, even if you don't always feel like it. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi.